Welcome to the fourth panel of our OpenEU debate event, The Europe We Want, The Europe We Need. I am Ramona Coman from ULB, and I have the pleasure to moderate this panel with Luciano Morganti from VUB. Now, as a reminder for the members of the panel who joined us after the lunch break, just a reminder, so OpenEUDebate is a Jean Monnet project coordinated by the Université Autónoma in Madrid with the participation of the VUB, ULB, and also the National School of Political Science and Public Administration in Bucharest and Agenda Pública. And for all of this, we have the support of the Brussels Parliament and the support of the European Union Erasmus Plus program. So what we are doing here with this project OpenEUDebate is that we try to match EU's policies with Europeanized politics, at least this is what we said in the project, at the national level in order to create a platform that connects the debate on Europe. So we work as a network connecting the available knowledge on EU issues with this growing demand on information at the national level to foster an evidence-based debate among decision makers and citizens across Europe. The ambition of the project is in line, of course, with what we academics want, is to create a place for plural and open debate, a forum for critical thinking about the European project and its future. Now, this morning, you know, you were here, 100 students and citizens shared views on European Union they want and need, and this World Café, this sophisticated method for holding meaningful conversation, proved, I think, to be very useful. For this afternoon, we invited, for the first panel, academics, journalists, and also members of the civil society to discuss the questions that we propose for this consultation and then to ask them, to invite them to react to your feedback and solutions that you proposed. So, this being said, for this afternoon panel, we have the pleasure to welcome 3 speakers with different backgrounds, and I will leave the floor now to Luciano to introduce them briefly.
Thank you very much, Ramona. So, welcome to the 3 of our speakers for this afternoon, for this beginning of the afternoon. I will start with Tremeur Denigot. He's the communication director of CIVICO and the project manager of #WeEuropeans project. I guess you will tell us more, but CIVICO is a non-for-profit, independent, transnational association aiming to give a new impulse to the European project and to democracy and citizenship in a changing world. Tremeur, your experience, 25 years of experience on knowledge and information sharing in international, European, multicultural and multilingual environment. #WeEuropeans is a multifaceted and transnational and transpartisan, so it's very much in line with our Jean Monnet network, EU-wide civic campaign aiming at mobilizing citizens for the European project. Louise Hoon, she's a researcher at the VUB, and her research focuses on the effects of Eurosceptic voting and EU issue voting on policy congruence between political parties and voters. Now, we had the pleasure to read very recently a paper that you published, just I think 1 week ago or even less than that, Supranational Democracy Adrift. There you say that there are important constraints to supranationalism, right? That might, and to the European Parliament, of course, that might change the future of the European integration process in a way which is more intergovernmental than supranational. So, I guess you will refer to this in your presentation. And then Maebh McMahon, she's a journalist, a conference moderator, a political debates moderator. She joined the Brussels Bureau of Euronews NBC, a news channel with a pan-European perspective. She reports live and produces news packages for news and current affairs. She contributed to the international news channel France 24 as their Brussels correspondent. And she was also the Brussels correspondent for Radio France. So I think the panel is well set to tell us what you think about and what is your opinion about the 3 questions that we asked our students. We asked it on an online surveys. The first one is European leadership. What is your message for the next president of the European Commission? We would like to have your thoughts. There will be two more other questions. The second will be about European policies. What are the main problems of Europe today? And the third one will be about European priorities. What should be the main priorities of the European Union after this election, basically? So the first one is about European leadership. What is your message for the next president of the European Commission? The second one is about European policies. What are the main problems of Europe today? And the third one is about European priorities. What should be the main priorities of the European Union after the election in the next term? What we would like to ask you is to give your views about the first question to start. What is your message for the next president of the European Commission? And then once you will have given us your opinion, we will turn to the result of the debate today, and we will have on the slide here projected what is that we gather together as thoughts and as ideas about the main messages for the next European president. So I guess the floor will be, I'll start from.
Thank you so much. Yeah, my name is Maebh McMahon. I'm delighted to be here. It's a pleasure as someone who's been reporting the European Union for the last couple of years, which is a challenging task to try and make it interesting and explain it to viewers and listeners. It's a pleasure to come here and meet, and especially with these elections coming up, they're so crucial and so important. And the first question that you're asking me here is, what is my message for the European Commission? Well, the current president, Jean-Claude Juncker, well, I have a very strong message for him, and that is very clearly, short and sweet, listen to people. And really listen, not just pretend to listen, but actually get down from the Berlaymont building and just walk out to the streets of Europe and actually talk to people, engage with people. And there's just such a mass movement now we're seeing across Europe. People they do care, they're getting up and they're taking to the streets or they're taking to social media to make their point about various issues that they're worried about. But I very, very rarely see a European Commission president or a European Commissioner actually getting down there and mixing with protesters and strikers and listening and taking note of their issues. So that would be my core message, which would be get out of your bubble, get out of the EU quarter, and actually just listen to people and take that on board then when you're making real policies.
Thank you. Yes, my message for the next Commission President would be, and I think a bit different from what we've seen in the presentation and a bit different of, I think, what is generally also advised to this person, because even from the answer from my previous panel member, it is very much about what we advise these leaders is very much about communicating what is Europe, explaining Europe, making people like Europe, get closer to citizens. And for me, this remains something, in a way, I see how it's necessary, but this as a goal in itself is a bit problematic for me, because I think there is no other political system where we think about communication and political communication like this. My message for the next European Commission President would be to make political choices, to govern Europe, and to communicate clearly that these choices are political choices. So to stop communicating that Europe is something that we all like, to stop communicating that Europe is something that we should all want and that we should all need, but to actually have a political agenda during the campaign and to clearly execute this agenda while in office. And this, I think, would give voters much more of a sense that Europe is relevant, because there would be some content to the message of this president, rather than the now quite, well, I wouldn't say empty, but the quite broad defense of Europe that we have seen with previous Commission presidents.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everyone. So thank you for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here today. So what will I ask to the next president of the European Commission? So first of all, I will be very pleased to be able to ask something to the next European Commission president. I don't know if I will be in that position. I hope it will be a woman. I got my doubt on that, but it would be nice. I hope I would be able to speak in French. I think that a European Commission president has got to be something like a pope and to speak a lot of languages. Actually, Juncker is not that bad on that at the moment. So it's about leadership. So that's exactly what I will ask him or her. So what do you intend to do to keep that leadership? A leadership that has been foreseen by the very treaties. and which is linked to a specific power that the European Commission has, which is the initiative right. So what will you do with that initiative right? Do you intend to not to use it? Do you intend to leave it to the states? Do you intend to propose, or not only to control? If you want to be part of the play and to be really a player, you don't have to be seen as a referee. At the moment, I think the European Commission is seen as a referee. And a referee is the bad guy, really, you know. And he's the one who is giving sanctions, and that's it. But he's not kicking the ball. When in fact, the very treaties have foreseen from the very beginning that the European Commission was supposed to make proposals. This is leadership, and to share that, of course, with more and more of the European Parliament. So, all this just to say that we've got to keep, to my view, with the community method. And that's what I will ask that person. Do you intend to keep that community method? Or do you want to go in the direction of the actual tendency, which is the one going to intergovernmental politics and approach? So one could say, okay, this has been the case from the very beginning of the European Union, or of the CE, which is right, actually. But I think it's getting worse, and it has been worse since the multiple crises that occurred 10 years ago. So when you think about it, for instance, you look at the tools that have been developed after the crisis, almost all of these tools are based on intergovernmental power and distribution of power. So that, which is quite typical, isn't it? So it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. It can work another way, but it won't be the union we want to have. And hence the actual proposition for trying to have some kind of multiple speed union, because you don't manage to do things all together. So if we want to keep going on all together and to base our project on solidarity, we need a community method. And that's supposed to be the main really power and responsibility of the European Commission.
And Chair, if I may add just to the first point I made, because I was speaking more specifically about Jean-Claude Juncker, but we're focusing now on the future person. Yes. So my message to the future President of the European Commission, well, I would also like to see a woman. I would like to see a woman like the Danish lady, for example, Margrethe Vestager, who's currently the Commissioner for Competition. She is a lady who takes a holistic approach to politics, and she's a lady who would very much want to see half and half, male, female in the Commission. As you know now, there's 8 or 9 commissioners that are female, and that was a struggle for member states to send even female commissioners. So it's up to the member states as well to send more women to Brussels if they want to see more female representation. So yeah, what she also is very press friendly. She takes time to listen to press and to be interviewed and stuff like that, and doesn't gag her commission the way Jean-Claude Juncker slightly does. So yeah, I would like to see somebody like that, and just tell her to be a little bit more open, a little bit more out there with the people, and a little bit more down to earth. So there you go.
Louise, reaction to this? To the comments that you heard?
Not immediately. I completely agree with my colleague here, indeed, about this. His comments about the community method and the fact that, indeed, in reaction to the crisis, we have seen a lot of, not just, well, as I write in the paper, also not just intergovernmentalism, but intergovernmentalist muddling, really, because it's not official intergovernmentalism either, as these decisions have not been approved by national parliaments. Yes, but that's indeed an important point of critique, but also a very difficult point of critique, I think, because to really apply the community method, there needs to be more support. There need to be a credible European Parliament that is not elected by less than half of the European Union citizens. So these are all issues that indeed need to be attended to. Yeah.
Actually, I heard that there were some misalignments between the findings of this morning and your suggestion, but on the contrary, I see that they are quite very much aligned, because all the topics that unfortunately we'll have to turn to see on this slide we have been discussed, and I've got a few remarks or questions for a few of you. For example, participate, be in between the people. That's a point that is very important. We discussed that. But is there something that is impeding them or the two previous one to do so? Because I don't think They didn't really try so far, did they? Do you remember any commissioner that was probably better? Tell us your feedback about this, your vision about this. Then we also discussed this morning the quality of a leader for the European Union. And we said that we discussed, it didn't go into the slides like this, that he or she, hopefully she, should be daring to actually to walk their path and to be brave and to put forward policy for their political visions. And then about this using the community methods, I think we all agree with that, but it doesn't depend entirely on them. Because what we are asking basically here, what we are asking is a change. Support, for example, is very important. And are we sure that we are living in a period in which whoever will be the president of the Commission will have the support? Because we are living in a struggle between intergovernmentalism and supranationalism. And probably in the pendulum in between these two interpretations of the European Union integration process, we are now more on the side of an intergovernmental Europe. So my question to you is, why didn't they go and speak? Why didn't they mingle with the citizens, the previous president, and all the things that you defined for them? Is it possible for them to do so without the support of the member states and the support of the other institutions?
Because this is very much related to what Luciano said, and then we will ask you to react to the feedback that we received from the consultation. What is your opinion on the political commission? Because this Juncker commission was a political commission, and now we are talking again about this process, Spitzenkandidaten and so on and so forth. So maybe you can say also, related to what Luciano's question, also to answer to this question, what is your opinion on the political commission?
Well, first, just on that point about why don't the commissioners mingle with the people, there was an attempt. I think it was Viviane Reding, the former Justice Commissioner back during the Barroso Commission, who set up these citizen dialogues, which were commissioners travelling to the various member states and having a debate, engaging with citizens. So they would hold these in various cities, not just capitals, but in various kind of more regions of Europe and stuff. But they were so rehearsed and orchestrated and organised that they just weren't real, and they weren't really reaching out to real people. This was, I guess, the Commission afraid maybe to say something that was off script, or they have to read their document, that their speech that's written by their speechwriter and checked by 20 or 30 civil servants. There's this fear, and this is where you talked about this courage. It's the fear to actually just speak the truth. When meanwhile you've got politicians like Nigel Farage who are down in the pub, having a pint, speaking a language that people understand, and putting his clips out on YouTube in a language that people understand, and he's so famous and become this character. And meanwhile, you've got other people who are unheard of because they're not just mingling with the people, as you say. I think it's time for the Commission to perhaps try and do that. But that brings you to the point, I suppose, of the political commission. Jean-Claude Juncker's famous last words, this was his last chance commission, he said in 2014, when he was coming in, and he said he would try to adapt a very political commission, but in that he tried to, I think, control perhaps the institution so much that it was hard for the communication. I know you said communication's not important, but I guess in my job it is, because our role is to try and explain really what goes on inside the institutions and what the role is and what they're trying to do, because there's so many people that do work really hard, but that message doesn't really get out there, and it's still very much a misunderstood, a very mysterious institute.
Thank you. Yes, I don't think communication is not important at all. That's not the point I try to make, and it links indeed also back to the points that were made here. What I just am a bit more critical of is the type of communication and the type of education, and also the type of communication that often surrounds these citizens dialogues, the citizen initiative, also the Spitzenkandidaten campaign, because I think this is much of what went wrong with the Spitzenkandidaten in 2014, and this is the type of communication that is more promotion than actually a political battle between candidates with relevant alternative positions. So that brings me also to the relevance of a political commission. I'm very much in favor of a political commission. I think this is something that could bring life to politics at the European level, and that could actually incite citizens to be interested in European politics for their content, and not because either they like Europe or they dislike Europe and they want to go vote against the Eurosceptic candidate. So I think this is very, very important. I also think there is a long road ahead towards it, because indeed it cannot happen without the support of the member states, and it cannot happen without fundamental institutional review. And I think this is like much more than all the side business, I think, of deliberating and giving young students the impression that the European Union is relevant for them, etc. But for me, like the main point is that the EU is democratically not working. Like, there's an institutional problem. The Parliament doesn't have the power to influence EU politics, and that's also why voters do not find European Parliament elections very relevant. I mean, of course, we can keep thinking about how do we incite voters to turn out to vote, and why are people not showing up. But if they don't have a lot to say, it's also not so surprising that they don't show up, I think. So if these elections don't have a lot of impact, then we can keep looking at citizens and educating citizens and doing a lot of cool campaigns to make them turn out. But I think as long as you don't make this parliament powerful enough, that's not a big improvement either, I think. So that's my point.
Thank you. Yeah, I was listening to what you were saying before about the last chance commission. There was so much drama about that when Juncker arrived. I understand the concern, of course, and I'm still very worried about the way things are going on, but I'm fed up really to hear the last chance things. You know, every council seems to be the last one, you know, the critical council, I don't know, I think it becomes difficult for journalists because they are running out of adjectives, you know, for the council. They're always using the same one because that's the way it's presented. You know, that council is absolutely the last one. If not, everything is going to fall down. It's terrible. Yeah, exactly. Well, the one who is coming is quite critical. It's the last chance council for sure. But the political commission, that was the intention of Juncker. Actually, I'm not that sure that he managed to do a political commission. That's my own personal view on that. I think Juncker wanted to be the president of the council. He didn't want to become the president of the commission. Don't forget that. And I think in a way, and again, that's my personal view, he was a bit a president of the council being a president of the commission, which is a bit weird. Hence, perhaps the proposal he made, and I'm very much in favor of it, actually, of having the same president of the council and the commission. The real issue will be to understand whether or not it will be a president of the council being the president of the commission or president of the commission being the president of the council. But the intention is to try to be more efficient, certainly, but to try to stop fighting between council and commission and having some kind of strong power at the head of Europe. So there are a lot of things to tell about that. And I can understand, in a way. Coming to communication, I don't want to say too many things because I was supposed to say things about communication for the next question. But anyway, don't think that corporate communication and institutional communication can do a lot. Let's be frank. I mean, obviously the Commission has got a part to play but I mean, they won't be able, really, to give all the information needed to the citizens. And to be frank, I agree with you, there were some attempts to correct a bit things, but with the means of a commission. So the citizens' dialogues were an example of that, a bit laughable sometimes, I must say. Remember that Juncker, during the first press conference, was there. It was very interesting. It was very, last chance commission. And he was asking the commissioner to be present in the press room very frequently and not to send someone else on spokes to take the floor. That's what he changed the service of spokes as well as the European Commission. So he knew there was something to do there, and to ask people and himself in the very first place to go on the floor and to be in contact with people. Now, did they manage really to overcome all the limits? Language is a limit, by the way. Huh? And to have you ever seen a European commissioner on your national TV who is not from your country? I don't know. Just a question. Okay. So, interesting.
Yes. Well, for today, the idea was to have a dialogue, so we immediately opened the floor because I saw that there are questions in the audience, so we will take 2 or 3 questions for this first. What is your message for the next President of the European Commission? So please introduce yourself. And you have a question too?
Hello. Hello, my name is Dragoshin. I'm a student at CIVICO Bucharest, part of the OpenEUDebate project. I also manage the social media of this platform. My question comes from one of the viewers and from myself. How could we involve the future candidates for the EU Commission presidency, so the Spitzenkandidaten, in a more participatory debate, so they could be closer to those who will benefit from the EU Commission policies? How can we establish a forum of debate in which the common citizen will be able to address questions to these candidates? Because what I saw in 2014, one debate in 2 or 3 months was, I'm sorry, but not enough. And how could we do this more proactive and more engaging at European level? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. Other questions? So, yes, maybe one or two. Yes, then Sami Chauvet from the Institute for European Studies.
Thanks. As a reporter for Euronews, actually, what type of media do you think that can be locally? Because all the media are actually, there is no local media speaking about Europe. Euronews speaking about Europe, actually, not a lot of people like going to Euronews is well known for us because we in Europe, but not a lot of local people who are not interested about the European Union don't actually know Euronews. So do you know some local media who's actually speaking about Europe?
This is again a discussion about communication, and I remember that this morning communication was an important topic of discussion, so it was about how to communicate, how to simplify the message also, and another point was, it's on the slides of course, is how to adapt this communication. And even I think it was a very interesting suggestion coming from our participants, it was even at the European level to try to simplify the strategy, communication strategy of the European Union, to have more coherence between the European Commission, the Parliament, and for example, the committees. So this is again about communication and how to communicate about Europe. Álvaro Oleart, member of the project.
Thank you very much. It's Álvaro Oleart, member of the Institute for European Studies and OpenEUDebate. We had Professor Lance Bennett before, and he suggested that why not the Commission President should be elected by popular vote. I was wondering whether you think that if the Commission President would be elected by popular vote, that would increase the visibility or that would change something about how Europe is seen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, 3 questions. Who wants to start, Maebh?
Thank you so much for your questions. Great to have such an engaging audience. So the first one, how can we involve future candidates in debate? How can we make sure these debates... Well, I totally agree with you. Again, these debates the last time were pretty much staged. I remember they took place in Brussels. Those in the Brussels bubble or those interested in EU politics anyway followed them. But outside the Brussels bubble, I don't think a whole lot of people... I mean, I know my friends back in Ireland wouldn't have watched them and wouldn't have been familiar with the candidates at all. So I guess the idea would be to bring those debates maybe to national level, but that again is up to the politician, how much will there is on that politician to get out there and engage and debate. I know Manfred Weber, the aspiring European Commission President from the European People's Party, he's on a European tour, but again, very similar to the tour that Jean-Claude Juncker did on his bus a couple of years ago with Martin Selmayr and Margarita Skinas and Mina Andrieva, all his spokes team. Again, it was a little bit staged, a little bit orchestrated, and it's not really getting out there and kind of, as we said earlier, mingling with the people. But one thing we're doing now actually at Euronews, we began our election special coverage there a couple of weeks ago, and we've started an EU road trip. So we have a daily show, a talk show called Raw Politics, and we have a red sofa, which is normally here in Brussels. So we're taking that red sofa all around on a road trip. So it's an inflatable sofa. So we're getting people to sit on the sofa. So we're going to invite the Spitzenkandidat and aspiring members of the European Parliament to sit on that sofa and engage with people. And we've started the road trip already in Portugal, and our reporters have already spoken to lots of people about the issues at their heart. Because Brussels and EU politics is not just about summits, emergency summits, last chance summits and Brexit. It's about real people, and it's about improving real people's lives. So that's what we're trying to do with that reporting. And on the second question, thanks for that about the local media. Well, I used to work for a radio network in Ireland where we would cover the plenary sessions in Strasbourg, and we would send our stuff over to Irish radios, and I have to say there was zero interest. Nobody cared about what the MEPs were voting on and the various resolutions. So, but when it comes to stories like Brexit, there's a lot of interest on local Europe, or a lot of stories that are scandals as well. Tends to be pretty bad, negative stuff coming out of the EU. Local radios and stuff in Ireland would pick up on it. But once there, a couple of weeks, was it last Friday when the climate marches took place? For the first time in the last couple of years, I actually saw local media engage in a European story really, really impressively. And that's when I saw students from my local town where I grew up in Ireland taking to the streets to join the Greta Thunberg movement, the climate change activists. And that's when I really started to gradually see the kind of gap between the EU institutions and bigger global issues become important for people in smaller areas. So maybe that's the start of something big. And I'm going to pass on if you want.
Yes. Well, firstly thank you for your questions. Firstly about the Spitzenkandidaten. Well, my thoughts are how to make it more participative. Well, my first reaction is also I don't even really know what the fate will be of the Spitzenkandidaten in 2019 because it's very unclear. The support for the whole procedure, even amongst the political groups in the parliament, is eroding. I think the outcome of the election is so unclear that there is very little support within the European Council to even follow suit with the procedure. So I think that there is a very big chance that this whole Spitzenkandidaten will deflate like a balloon, which I think is very, very, very problematic. And this is also why I think this whole procedure was problematic from the beginning, because it was just, and this is also why, and now, okay, I try to make it a bit systematic, but I think this is very problematic because you tell citizens that they can elect a president in a system where they cannot elect a president, in a system where they cannot even vote for the candidates that are staged as presidential candidates. But on their national list, these candidates do not even figure. So if you want to make the European Union more democratic and more accessible to citizens, and if you want to involve citizens in EU elections, in European Parliament elections, then please let them participate in a meaningful way. So communicate to them what kind of parliamentary system we have in the EU, and do not present a consensus system as a presidential system, which is very confusing and which is very confusing for citizens. It's not clear, and you also kind of stage something that doesn't exist. And eventually, as we see now, and I think as we will see in 2019, this is going to backfire tremendously for the European Parliament, because it's a big problem for their credibility when you let people elect your president, but half of the groups, or half, not half, but a few of the groups do not participate in this Spitzenkandidaten procedure. One of the candidates may be a very strong anti-European candidate. So this whole procedure risks to become a battle between pro-European candidates and EU basher. Yes, all of this I think is quite misleading really to citizens. So the idea of electing the Commission President by popular vote, I don't really support it, because I mean I would love to see citizens be more engaged in European Parliament elections, but I think that we should really be honest with them and tell them how the system works and let them vote consistently with that system, and not in order to create participation, organize something that will incite citizens, but that doesn't have anything to do with how power will be divided afterwards. I think that's problematic, yeah.
Thank you, Louise. Fully agree with you on that. And it's true that we don't know what will happen with the Spitzenkandidat system, which is a pity. It was a very good idea. It was perfectly consistent with the parliamentary system. So a majority, the head of a commission or the head of the executive power comes from the majority of the parliament. And that way, of course, citizens are empowered. So it wasn't exactly that, but I mean, it was much better. And there was a kind of good success with the debates. It was giving faces, so it was something becoming concrete, you know, for people. I see that guy, or I like that guy, I will vote for that guy, you know, that kind of feeling we didn't have during the presidential election. And Euronews was, I'm a great fan of Euronews, I must say, so I'm very happy to see that you've got new ideas, because we got to be frank here again. I mean, it's not easy. It's not easy. If you want to organize a debate with a lot of people, I mean, it's already a problem. Remember, for instance, the debate on TV. I don't know if you've watched it last time in the UK. You have all these guys, because mostly they are guys, like that, and one after the other, you know, kind of, you know, explaining what he was supposed to do with no interaction. It was so boring. But I mean, and then you add the problem of language, and it becomes a real issue. So it's really a nightmare to organize, I must say, and to make it a bit lively. And so new ideas are very welcome, because we need to see these guys in all the countries. Why? Because that's the only way to remind people that European elections are about Europe. And I don't have your age, of course, but until the last time, for me, European elections were about national realities and issues. Because you were seeing on the TV, if you were lucky, something about European elections, and they were just guys from your country talking about national issues. That was, and then people say, oh, they're not interested in elections, they want to vote. Of course they're not. Okay, so that's regional press. Well, it depends on the countries, really. If you take France, for example, the first newspaper is West France, which is a regional newspaper, if you want. And the coverage of European affairs is absolutely brilliant. So that very much depends from one country to another. And by the way, when the press will begin to consider that European affairs are not international affairs, in Le Monde, for instance, a few years ago, it was like that. You had to read the international pages to understand what was happening in Europe. Europe are not international affairs, they are internal affairs. And that's the big switch we need to, and it's happening at the moment, I must say. And then there was another point, I think, about the, no, I think I'm done. No, just one thing. Sorry, someone was saying, I'm sorry, I don't remember who it was, that communication had to become more simple. Well, it depends what we're talking about. In a way, it should become more complex. And I want to explain something about that. If it's about corporate communication, what the institutions too often do, and it's not about bad will, but they are the means they have, is that they decide everything in Brussels, everything is centralized, and then it's for all the countries, you know? And that doesn't work, of course. So I'm very much in favor of communication that would be totally adapted to the national or even regional reality. The institution got means like that, like representation, for instance, the Bureau d'Information of the European Parliament. They don't have enough resources, believe me. And you need to adapt, to contextualize. You can say that in English? To contextualize really the news, and then it works better.
Very shortly, so we move to the next.
Another quick response to the workings of the whole Spitzenkandidaten campaigns, also especially in 2014, and this might change in 2019 if the campaign goes on. But the fact is that the two main competitors in the Spitzenkandidaten race, it was clear that they were going to collaborate and continue to collaborate as they have done over since forever in this grand coalition. So I don't think you could really speak of true competition between two coalition partners that are tied together very strongly. So you see, I think this also really, towards citizens, did more damage than good, and that it really made European politics look like exactly what populists and Eurosceptics want to make it look like, which is like an elite collaboration, meaningless debates, and no ear for what citizens think or are concerned with. Yes.
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, right. If someone wants to say something, I'm sorry, because I'm monopolizing the. Actually, I don't agree with that, and I perfectly understand what you say, and it makes full sense. But I'm not that sure about that. How could I explain that? I've lost my idea now, of course. No, I've lost it. I come back to it after, because no, it's about the fact that, I mean, for me, the Spitzenkandidat, first of all, I mean, it's about Macron if we got an issue at the problem, because the Spitzenkandidat and it's obviously, I mean, the one who will win, of course, will come from the EPP. So this is why they say, okay, it's not good, because we know already, I mean, who is going to win. So obviously that doesn't work. And this is when we've started to have an issue with that. I mean, that's that argument, sorry, I'm tired. That argument about the fact that, I mean, it's not a proper debate because we know that these guys are going to work together. But this is parliamentary system. That's how it works. And I get absolutely no problem with that. I mean, when you look at, of course, seen from France, for a lot of French people, that's something which is weird. Of course, because the institutions are totally different. And they elect a king, a Republican king, and directly by the people. And they've got kind of an issue with the way a parliament is working. But in a parliament, on a daily basis, what do? You try to make consensus. And consensus is not a weak thing, it's not a bad thing, it's the way to build up politics altogether if you don't have a majority. So by force, the right wing and the left wing have got to find a way, agreement to create that consensus. And if you come and you say, yes, I mean, but that's not good. Because you have to stick to your position, but forget democracy at that point. I'm a bit exaggerating.
Completely agree. Completely agree, yes. No, the only thing I would say is I completely agree. I'm not an opponent of consensus or of consensus democracy. I just like it when consensus democracy is presented to citizens as consensus democracy and presidential democracy is presented as presidential democracy.
There will be the possibilities to come back to this. Let me just very briefly say that I'm very glad that you do not agree completely, because the title of this session is Contrasting Views about the Future of Europe. So it's excellent, excellent. But I wanted to make a general comment about what is happening now, because we were moderating the World Cafe's debates, and actually something came out in this moderation. We were, I think, very cautious in doing things within the institutional framework. While the message that I get from you, and I'm very, very happy about this, because this is a lesson for all of us, is that we should be daring. We need a political commission. We need an institutional renew. That means to change the treaty, to make this possible. And then I really like very much this discussion that you had about the switch in our mindset. We see too much the European Union as international politics. It is not anymore. It is not since a long time, since we have a common market, of course. It is internal policy. And this is the switch. And this goes everywhere. This goes on the press, because there are still a lot of magazines that put the European Union at the very end or only at the beginning when it's a scandal or something like this. So it should really seen as something belonging to our internal policy. And then one last thing before we go to the next question. You are maybe very right. You remember there was a period when the Maastricht Treaty was not voted by the Danes, where we suddenly realized that the Europe that Brussels was doing, it was about the internal market and other stuff. It was not perceived like that. And now we are in a situation in which probably what we are discussing in Europe is again not adapted to what the people of Europe want. So we are discussing now local issues, the internal problem of Europe, while the people want to go and discuss the global challenge. And that's very good. That is what is happening in Belgium, in Europe, since weeks and weeks. We want to discuss global challenges. So I think we can go on with the discussion, but we need to move to the second question. And the second question that I would like you to answer, and maybe I will start from my far right, not politically, I guess, but my far right on that. What are the main problems of Europe today? So if you can say what are the main problems, and mind that there will be a next question, which is what should be the priorities? And problems and priority are two different things, of course. Problems are, I guess you agree with me, what is not working, what policy we are missing, and the priorities that we will discuss more or less in 20 minutes from now are what we should go for in the next few years. So please, what are the problems of Europe?
So I think I'm going to talk about what you've been talking about before, which is in a way communication, but I don't like that word, I must say. It's about publicity. I come from public, and publicity was about politics before it was about selling pens or glasses. So the fact is that European, because it's about European policies, huh? That's right, huh? But the question, European policies, I don't remember the words. What are the problems of Europe? There's an S, so I can say a few things. So the thing is that people, I don't know, your friends, your family, they don't know, let's be frank, they don't know, or they know very little about European policies. But that's a fact. So maybe you're lucky enough to because of course you're students in politics, and so you're having a lot of friends that know a lot, but I mean, that's not the way it is at European level. So that's an issue, of course. I remember 20 years ago, I should say after Maastricht, because I mean, I do believe that the European Union in where we're living at the moment is a plus 25 years after 92, of course, the Maastricht Treaty. That's European Union, when before it was something different. So you can say that, okay, Europe is 60 years old. To my view, it's really 25 years old. Things have changed a lot since that time. So anyway, so 20 years ago, when I was 5 years old, no, I'm sorry. People knew very little about Europe. That's for sure. And I remember in Brussels, I think from France, there was one correspondent. You had to read articles, very serious one, very difficult and complex in Le Monde, you know, things like that, if not, no one was talking about Europe. But people thought that Europe was doing little. They knew about CAP, maybe. And in France in particular, of course, and in Italy. For the rest, you know, I think that nowadays people know little, but they think that Europe does a lot. And in both cases, to my view, it's wrong. In both cases, they thought that European Union was doing little, when in fact it was doing much more for what they thought, because they didn't know. And now they think that European Union is doing a lot, when in fact it's not doing that much. Which is something that we've got to keep in mind, to my view. But the same thing remains, that they know little. And I was playing, I used to be a teacher, and I was playing a lot with, I'm working in the institution as well, to asking friends about Europe, you know. And it's laughable if you begin to ask people around you. So you don't pretend to laugh in front of them, of course, when you're playing that game. But you say, questions I was asking. It's a true story, huh? How many countries or member states are there in the European Union? Just ask that question. Try. You'll see the answer. So then you can ask the name of the President of the Commission. Can you name one MEP? Things like that. You will see it's very, very interesting. People know so very little about it. I must say that European institutions don't help. Think about it. I mean, we've got, I don't know who has invented that, but when you think about it. So you've got the European Council, which is new, by the way, and quite new, I should say. And it was really the best idea they had. Oh, let's name it European Council, when they had the Council of Europe and the Council of the European Union. It's easy to understand, of course, for an average citizen. And people are still making the mistakes. And here I'm talking about politicians and the press. It doesn't help, I must say, so it's not clear. I was reading an article this morning, for instance, they were talking about Ireland and the issue which is critical, as you know, of course, very well, that's happening at the moment at the frontier between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And the article was saying that the European Union has put 500 million euros just to try in peace, you know, and try to make communities together, and 500 million euros. You knew that? I didn't even know it. 500 million euros. Another figure I read 2 days ago, which is for you, press in particular. It's very interesting to my view. I mean, do you know what's the average of on TV? And TV remains the first media. Okay, social media is going up, but TV is very strong. The number of programs you have on French TV that are dealing with EU and EU institutions. What would you say? Have you got an idea? It's almost that. Because it is, let me remind it exactly, that's it. It's 2.7%. And if you take off Arte, you've got 1.9. So, okay, that's it. That's the reality we're dealing with. So and then I finish. Can we then, once we've been saying that, okay, oh, people don't know that. So we say, nah, the Commission has got to do a better communication, or the European Parliament has got to do better communication. But they won't be able to do that. They won't. They can do things, and they're trying, they're struggling. They've got good ideas sometimes, very bad over time. But they can't. They don't have the means. I mean, we will talk about Europe when really it will become something in our daily existence. And that's, I'm too long, I'm sorry, because that's another problem which is linked to it. When Europe is going to do a lot of things really in our daily lives, at that point, journalists and politicians will begin to talk about it. But don't forget the budget we have, which is very little. So 1.1%, and people are trying to push for more of GDP. So the thing is that the real power is still in the hands of the states. So budget would be another issue, and then I finish because I had democracy, but I got a lot of things to do to say on democracy, so I will say afterwards. And just one idea is that for democracy, that I will develop on the next point, when it comes to participation of citizens and things like that, we had, for instance, in the Lisbon Treaty, a lot of things that were in it. We don't use it. So before thinking about reforming the EU by doing new treaties or whatever, we should try to implement what we have in the actual treaties. And we don't do that.
Yes, just quickly to reply on, I completely agree that communication is a problem, and indeed that a lot of people know very little about the EU, and that this is very problematic because we need to know how our institutions function if we even want to participate in them. But I also often think that stressing so much that it's a communication problem sometimes excuses us, or we excuse ourselves, or European institutions can excuse themselves from the fact that there is also a fundamental problem with European democracy. And I think that solving that comes first, and communication will come after. Because it's easy to say it's a problem of communication, but if something is really wrong, then I think communication can never really solve it. I also don't think that to know, I mean, there's been a lot of research about this actually. We've for a long time thought that to know the EU means that you love the EU, and that's not true. It's not true that when people learn about the EU, they start to love it. So it's not true that if we would start communicating a lot about the EU, all of a sudden all the Eurosceptics would disappear. And I also think that we need to realize that to make people love the EU is not our job. People don't need to love the EU for the EU to work. That's not the priority. The priority is that the EU works as a democracy. And if then still there are many people that really don't like the EU, then we still have a problem, but then we have solved the real issue. And I think that's the real problem of Europe. It's the democratic deficit. And there, for me, the biggest problem of the democratic deficit is that we don't really know what citizens' problems are, and citizens themselves don't know how to voice them. So we fail to make citizens voice their daily life issues as European problems. They don't see it. The Gilets jaunes in the streets in Paris don't see what they share, what interests they share with people marching in the streets of Athens against austerity. This is, I think, the biggest problem in Europe. Citizens fail to see that they share interests, and we fail to allow them to communicate these at the European level.
I totally agree with that point that you made about regardless of how informed people are about the institutions, it doesn't mean that they're going to love them, and it shouldn't be about that. And that's often the problem with the strategy when you look at the European Parliament, their communication strategy. They're trying to force the EU down people's throats, or like have t-shirts printed with I love EU. It's not about that, it's about them just getting on with their job. And that's where the problems of the EU comes in. I mean, there's a long list of problems right now with the EU. I mean, a couple of them would be, look at Hungary, Poland, Romania, issues of rule of law, members of states that are going on a very illiberal path. That's of huge concern. And as well, the fact that EU states cannot agree on anything, apart from perhaps Brexit, there's unity on that, but when it comes to migration, and heads of state like Viktor Orban clearly campaigning against Brussels, even though he's a huge fan of being inside the European Union, a huge fan of being inside the single market, he's not communicating that to Hungarian citizens. He's portraying the EU always as something extremely negative, and that's proving to be a massive problem, massive headache right now for the EU, for the Commission, and there's talks that he might even be kicked out of the European People's Party. We'll find out today. In fact, he's in the Parliament at 5 o'clock. He'll be giving a briefing. So that would be, I think, a major problem now for the EU, because, I mean, essentially, if that would go on, you could eventually see the EU breaking up with the Visegrad 4 splitting. And so I think that's one of the biggest problems right now for the EU. Another big problem right now for the EU is, of course, the B word, the Brexit, the fact that they're losing the UK, and, of course, the shambles of the negotiations over the last year and a half. I mean, this is it's a huge problem. It should be a time for the EU to have a massive reflective period and to think and to see what they can learn from Brexit, that it should be a wake-up call. And that's where one of those points comes up about, oh, that was in the previous chart about criticising, looking in the mirror and being self-critical, and not just protecting the EU. I remember when José Manuel Barroso was the president, he was very protective of the Commission and everything they did, and if you dared criticise it, you were just evil, you know, you were a Eurosceptic, and he didn't even want to engage in a conversation with you, and that's very problematic. So instead of just framing people as Eurosceptics and the others and, oh, they're crazy, they're populist, no, actually engaging and realising, you know, these guys are actually talking a lot of sense. And another major problem with the EU, of course, is the social inequality, the lack of social Europe, the fact that there's just still massive disparities between what you can earn in one country to another. And I think until there's more fairness and more access to fair jobs and paid internships and proper rights, maternity leave, paternity leave, you'll never have a happy society, and you'll continue to have movements like the Gilets jaunes. And then I guess the last problem, I guess, is the constant scandals that the EU is always linked to, the bad press it gets, whether it's related to the Strasbourg commute, so the constant shuffling off to Strasbourg and spending a lot of money, as well the salaries that MEPs get and commissioners. People feel that's so unfair. Why don't they pay taxes when we do? I mean, there's a long list of the lack of transparency, the hidden meetings with the EU heads of state when they get together. All these things are just don't help the EU sell itself as a project and something tangible in people's lives.
Thank you. Before moving to the third question, maybe we can collect some questions from the audience.
Who has got questions on this? I do not have myself question, but a couple of points that I would like to stress. Well, I'm still observing a common path between our discussion and what we are saying here. I think that there were a few questions or a few very interesting reflections on the table. When did Europe really start it? It started with the Maastricht Treaty, which makes sense to think about it, because that was the completion of the single market and many other things, and the start of a new Europe. And probably people didn't even realize, a lot of us, a lot of our grandparents and parents, that somebody was building something in Europe. They were living the change, but they didn't realize that it was so much coming from a supranational institutions. I've got a question for you. How many of you know Arte? How many of you watch it regularly? Very good. But this is actually, you are not really representative of the public. And this is the problem. How many of you watch regularly Euronews? Still very few, considering the public. Now, just a very short side consideration, the Lisbon Treaty. The Lisbon Treaty brought us a clarification. Who does what? What are each other's competencies, right? Gave more power to the European Parliament, more co-decision. But yet, I think you are very right. We have got the instruments, but we do not implement them as we should. The bridging clause, for example, that would allow us to do a lot of things without going to a major revision of the treaty. So it might be that we have got an implementation problem. And then I agree very much with what has been said. We don't have to love Europe. And that, I think, is one of the main mistakes of the communication policy of the last 30 years, to make citizens try to love Europe. Europe is a political project. It doesn't have to be loved. It has to be understood and criticized to make it better. And this is why the point before about let's acknowledge the mistakes that we do, because until we don't do that, we will not be able to open the debate, right? And I think that would be a very, very good signal. We are not perfect, we make mistakes, right? And you mentioned scandals, but I ask myself a question. In all our countries, we have got scandals. But it seems to me that the European scandals, there are more scandals than other scandals, if I might say so. And we need to ask why. We need to ask why, and then I think we will go back to the issue of communication, to the role of media, which is a very important one, and probably we will not have the time to do so. Questions from the public, or we move to the third and last question for this panel? So, the third and last question was? What should be the main priorities of the next European Union?
You gave me the micro, but you pronounced the questions.
Please, and I suggest that we start from Louise then,
yes?
so we make...
Okay, well, I will be quite short. I think it's clear for me that the priority of the EU should be to become a really working democracy. The role of the European Parliament should be, indeed, not, I wouldn't even say enforced, but implemented as it is on paper. And I think a priority should indeed also be to have some institutional consistency. So if a procedure is done in an intergovernmental way, that it is done in an intergovernmental way, and that this is consistently applied, and that it's not a half European, half deal between national leaders. So for me, this is indeed a step that doesn't even need to take treaty revision. It means that that the EU needs to follow suit with what is on paper and be transparent and clear about it to citizens. I think that will be already a great step into the right direction.
Priorities, I think, should be social Europe, put the word social back into Europe and focus on people, real people and their livelihoods. Also tax justice, I guess that's linked. Crack down on tax evasion. I think that would be something that would be really important. Something that Margrethe Vestager is already kind of trying to do. And stop maybe looking so inwards and look a little bit more outwards and see as well the role the EU can play on the global stage, especially in the administration of Donald Trump. There's a role that the EU can play, especially in the Middle East peace process. There's so many roles that the EU can play and has been kind of hiding behind the United States. So I believe it really needs to stop looking inwards. But I guess when you've got things like Brexit that take up so much time is wasted on Brexit, which is something that's just overwhelmingly tragic that so much time has had to be wasted on this, and so many summits, and perhaps another emergency summit, that it's such a distraction when so much is happening. I mean, we're so lucky to live on a peaceful continent, but I mean, that's something we can't really take for granted. So it's a real tragedy to see so much time wasted on that when there's so much more we could be doing on the world stage. And then the other priority would be values, to really adhere to our values. I think that's so important, because the EU is not a military power, it's a soft power. So one thing that we should really shine out on is values, and that's where countries really need to come in line. And if they're misbehaving, they need to be called out on. So the Article 7 needs to be used and needs to be whipped. There you go.
Thank you so much. So it's talking about things that we shouldn't take for granted. Democracy, we don't have to take that for granted. And I think that Europe, the way it has been built, took for granted that, you got democracy, that's it. We don't even have to implement certain things in the treaties because the democracy remains democracy. That's not true. Same thing with Brexit, by the way. They didn't think that there was a possibility for a country to live. They didn't even think about it, which is very interesting when you think about it. So democracy is the key, and that's the tool. And once you get democracy, then you can start working on the priorities. So I'm going to tell you a story because, I mean, that's marketing time. I'm sorry, but I got to explain what we're doing with CIVICO Europa. By the way, it's CIVICO Europa and Make.org, which is a civic tech at the moment. and that has been closed last weekend, and we are going to organize an event that takes place in the Parliament on Friday. Just one thing I wanted to add before, to go back to what you were saying before, because I fully agree with you, the thing about loving Europe, you know. And when you think about it, that maybe the first campaign, tell me if I'm wrong, when we're so much talking about democracy because of the populists, and at the same time, we're not talking about that caricature of debate which is pro and in favor or against Europe, you know, which was the basis of a debate until now, a total caricature. And even Salvini, even Orban, very European, more than you. That's what they say. They don't know the same Europe. Okay, Orban wanted to be white and to be Christian, but he's in favor of Europe. So now we can start talking about Europe. So this is very exciting times in a way. We are beginning to talk really about what we want for Europe. Not anymore about, oh, I'm very much in favor of Europe. And I wave my flag. And the other one, oh no, I'm not. You know, that was a bit the debate in the past, a full caricature. So I go back to what we're doing. So because that's the start for CIVICO Europa, we do believe that the democracy, the European democracy, is a working process, and we've got to work a lot on it still, because there are things that must be improved, and we have to put the citizen at the center. And we forgot a bit, which is weird when you think about it. Democracy is supposed to be about the citizens, but we forgot a bit the citizens. So we decided to launch an operation that we have called We Europeans, and it's a different steps. There are different steps in the operation, which is I should say a civic mobilization, and the main moment is a public consultation. And because of the civic tech, we managed to launch, I think, the biggest. It was very complicated in 27 countries, in 24 languages. There was first a national round. It has started at the beginning of February. That round gave a possibility to people, to you maybe, you've participated, I don't know, to make proposals. I want Europe to be in favor of, I don't know, a minimum average wage or something like that. And then the other people were able to vote on your proposal. And we've been doing that for more than a month. And this gave us the possibility to extract, in a way, the 10 most adopted proposals at national level. Based on that, we had 270 proposals. These 270 proposals have been translated in 24 languages. And then the Europeans were able to vote on the proposals. And this has been concluded last weekend. And now we have 10 proposals that have been the most adopted proposals at European level. And I won't tell you what are these proposals, because they will be unveiled next Friday. But I will give you a hint about it. And that's very interesting. I was, in a way, personally, very positively surprised. And happy to see that the citizens, and I'm a citizen, agreed with what I think is the first priority, and not just for Europe, which is environment. And it's amazing to see that most of the proposals were about environment. And that's the same thing at European level. So it can be about plastic, it can be about circular economy, it can be about renewable energies. But anyway, it's about environment. So that's what the citizens have said. Then there were other topics, democracy, transparency on the institutions, you know, corruptions, democracy, I should say, on institutions, was a very strong topic as well. Taxation on big groups, GAFA, of course, that was a strong topic as well, strong theme. Another one was about education and research, which is very interesting, especially for education, which is not, as you say, and as you know, in the compétence communautaire, but it's something, of course, that is very important. And the last theme was about social policies. So this is what people are worried about. These are their concerns. And what could say, but what about migration and security?
Well, think about it. I mean, the refugee crisis in a way is over. It is over as well because anyway, you know that it dropped down the number of refugees as well because they don't want to come anymore because we catch them out. So of course that helps to end the crisis. And the financial crisis, I mean, that's not the top of the top at the moment, the situation, but it's much better. Anyway, people focus on these topics. And the environment is really the strongest one. And I'm happy about that because this is where we have, to my view, and here I'm talking in my this is what I think personally, we have to invest in that. And for that we need a budget. And we don't have it, sorry. We don't have a budget at the level of expectation of what we must do. But I don't know, I mean, I will give you the floor. But I will be very interested to hear you on that, and if you would have voted, if there were just themes, would environment would have been your first concern and priority for Europe? Considering, of course, that the clouds and the rivers don't stop at the frontiers, you know, there's another side, they can't stop. Yeah, we got to cross the borders.
Well, of course, some of us, and I will personally attend the event at the European Parliament, we Europeans, so I would be very happy to listen to the conclusions of your consultation. What we saw also this morning with, in our event is that it's something very, very interesting, is that very often we hear politicians saying that one of the problems is security. But today in the consultation and in our discussions, we talk about other issues. We talked about, for example, and what was interesting for me from the participation and the dialogue with you is that it's not only for example, sustainable development or climate change, is this related to social policies and social justice? It's not just jobs, it's jobs plus sustainable development, which is something which is, I think, new in the debate. So this relationship between what kind of economic development we want to have, it should be sustainable development, it should be related to climate change, it should be related to many, many other things. So this is something interesting from that I take with me from our discussions today. And also something which was interesting, and I agree with our three members of the panel, is that there is a lot of discussion about values. We talk about solidarity, we talk about rule of law, we talk about many, many democracy and many other values, which is also something interesting. Now, I agree with, I think it was you, Tremor, you said that also, for example, Viktor Orban speaks about values, he speaks about solidarity, he defends Europe and a certain vision of Europe, and I think this is the point that we have today, and this the idea of discussing critical views and critical visions for Europe is that we have this debate on values, we have different understanding. What is important, and this was also the idea with this debate, is that we talk to each other and we engage in this discussion and we understand what are the points and the arguments put on the table. So a lot of debate about values, but then the question is, and you mentioned it, Maebh, Article 7, how to enforce or how to ensure that there is respect for example, those European values. And then the question, direct question to you is how to do it, because Article 7 and this discussion and new debate about the rule of law conditionality, this creates new debates about, for example, dividing Europe between East and West, sanctioning citizens, for example, creating new forms of polarization, for example. So how to solve those problems, how to, for example, sanction or how to make sure that those values are respected in member states without sanctioning Indian citizens, because then that will be a suspension, for example, of European funds and so on and so forth. So that would be my last question for the last round of discussion, how to do this in the end without, of course, revising the treaties, which is something very, very difficult.
Well, I guess the sanctions thing, it's a bit like kind of a stick. I mean, the idea is not really to go as far as sanctioning and taking EU funds, but the threat of it should be enough. I mean, one would think that would put enough pressure, and the embarrassment then of losing your voting rights at council. But I don't have a solution to that. I mean, because of course it shouldn't be ordinary people who suffer in the end, and that's always the case with sanctions. So I mean, going that far to actually have to go ahead with sanctions, as in funding being cut, is not the ideal scenario. So yeah, I'd need to have a little think of how to put pressure on the likes of Law and Justice and Fidesz to try and put pressure on them without having to go as far. I don't have a silver bullet answer. Well, there you go. That's one way. Yeah, that's one way. I don't know if Louise probably has something more clever to say.
No, I will. I was thinking too much about something. I will come back to something else and pose the question.
Just on this, I mean, there are many ideas. So I won't tell you. Macron, for instance, was talking in the last speech he made of creating a kind of agency dealing with democracy for elections and things like that. That would be independent. I don't know. You could cut funds. That's quite harsh. It works pretty well. But if you cut funds, so saying, for instance, to a country, okay, no more, I don't know, structural funds because you crossed the line there. Who is saying that you crossed the line? So people come up with a new idea of having a kind of high authority made of very wise people, totally independent, able to decide whether or not democracy has been threatened in countries. That's a difficult issue, really. But I don't think that if we don't foresee some kind of a procedure and sanction, counting just on the goodwill and that's exactly what we've been doing until now, and I think it won't be enough.
Yes, I was not listening to the second part of your question because my mind was so much on one other thing that was mentioned partly by you, which is this issue of migration that doesn't really come out of these deliberative events, apparently. Yes, it's somewhere there, and well, you said your respondents did not really find it so important. And I think this says something so important also about how we should frame these type of events, because for 50% of Europeans, migration is the #1 issue when they vote. And in the Netherlands, the second largest party is an anti-immigrant party. I think it's a highly relevant topic for so many citizens who don't attend these kind of events. And for many of those citizens, migration is Europe, and Europe is migration. And I think this is also really important to keep in mind when we formulate recommendations, or yes, you've mentioned it before. I think we are well aware that we are not such a representative sample of the European public, but I also think that these issues in the European Parliament and in the institutions should really be attended to, of course not in the language and in the policy proposals that are put forward by the populist, Eurosceptic, anti-immigrant parties, but I do think that we should really attend to them as relevant issues and problems that need policy solutions. Yes. Yes, but I think this is completely normal with a pro-European public. This is what you find in any survey, and this is what you see, because people who vote for pro-European parties, they are pro-migration because they are the people that love movement, that did Erasmus, that went to university, and it's very normal that they are not, yeah.
Thank you, Louise. That was an interesting point, and it gives me the possibility to add something. I personally don't think that we don't have to talk about it. On the contrary, we've got to talk about it a lot and to think about it. That's absolutely for sure. But the interesting thing is, and you know that better than me as a researcher, is that when you ask people on various themes and you propose the themes, they choose it. That's something very different when you ask them open question. That's what we've been doing. And what come up is that 4%, maybe you would tell me, but I don't know if it's possible to say that all the people that have been participating, we're talking about, we've got 30,000 proposals, we've got 30 millions of votes, we've got almost 2 million people that have been participating. So, I mean, all of them are just the pro-European. I'm not sure about that. But when you ask people just openly what are their concerns and their priorities, the thing is that we are just 4% of the people who were talking about that. That doesn't mean that no one has been talking about that. But this is it. And as a matter of fact, in certain countries, more than in others. In Italy, for instance, more than in Hungary. And in France, I don't know why, but apparently it was much more about environment. So but you see my point. And then the second thing I wanted to add, which is more important to my view, is that the political agenda is made by the parties. And when the parties, and it has been like that in France and Italy for quite a long moment now, I'm living in Italy, and they are just talking about migration. So of course the people, what do they do? Then they vote for these parties, and then you can say, of course, people are very, very concerned about that migration. Of course, the parties are just talking about that. Salvini is wasting all his days on Facebook, on Twitter, and he's talking about that. So my question is, and I would be glad to hear your answer, is there any kind of big discrepancy between what the parties are telling us or are offering us in terms of ideas on what we really want?
Yes, I have a very concrete answer to that. Actually, and it may not be something you like. I think, well, many research has shown, not my own research, that actually the fact that migration and European integration are topics that have concerned many citizens for a long time, but that the mainstream parties did not talk about. And that then there were what we call challenger parties, so parties at the extremes that attend to, that talk about these issues, that are actually a concern to people, but that they don't see anybody speaking about, is the main, well, one of the main reasons why so many people have been drawn towards these new parties. So that's also why I think it's very relevant to not push the items that we don't like to this side of the agenda.
Well, I think it's now time to conclude this third panel discussion. Thanks a lot to the three panelists for the contrasting, not always, but contrasting views about the future of Europe. I remind the public that we gathered again together here at 4:15, so there is time for a coffee break. Thanks a lot for your views, your participation. Sorry, I didn't see the hands up. It's still possible. So, who wants to start? I apologize.
Yeah, okay. I'm just going to ask first because I think it relates to radical right parties in power, Hungary, etc. I always wonder, in 2000, there were sanctions by the EU 14 against Austria and the FPÖ. Why is it not possible to... The EU took us... Well, the EU 14 took a stand against this party and against their policy, and that was possible. And it is possible, again, talking about austerity and the financial crisis, it is possible to force a government to implement certain financial policies, but it's not possible to sanction a country who acts so deliberately and explicitly against the values of the European Union and the values that are in our treaty. Even if we had those sanctions before, why is it not possible today? Thank you.
Okay. Hi, I'm Christina Gonzalez, a student at the VUB and also a journalist. And my question is a complete departure from anything related to that. It's actually about perhaps maybe something that's missing from our list and has been missing in the panel discussion thus far, which is that of technology and digital regulation and the way that the EU could lead on issues more in the digital space or in artificial intelligence. We just had a lecture about that last night. And so I'm curious if perhaps we've missed something in this discussion today. Thank you.
I didn't see any other hands up before, so I think I can give back the mic to the panelists. Who wants to start? Two challenging questions, right?
I'll just be brief because I know you're down for your coffees. Thanks for your questions. On the first question, I mean, I would think because the head of the three institutions are from the European People's Party and Viktor Orban was from that political group, so there was a fear to maybe push him too far. But Jean-Claude Juncker has been quite tough on him at the last EU summit, saying it's fake news, all the stuff he's been saying about him. And today we're seeing that discussion happening about him being pushed out of the party. So maybe there might be more of a movement. But you've got something to add there, I think. And then on the artificial intelligence, fascinating topic, but I guess it's just a huge topic that I mean, it doesn't come up as much, I mean, in my daily life now, because I'm covering more breaking news and stuff, so that's probably why I didn't bring it into the room today, but a lot to be said there.
Yes, I can only speculate for an answer on your very good question, I think. I agree with your suggestion. I also think maybe recently in this context of seeing deeper and deeper divides between the East and the West, there is a bit more like we want to keep these Eastern European countries on board. We don't want to fortify this division or make it deeper. You see what I mean? Maybe that's why there is more. The leaders are a bit more careful. I don't know.
Yeah, because in fact, the more the Commission kind of spanks or points the finger at Poland, the more people vote for Law and Justice Party, because they sell it as that, and it's the same. So it's a real careful act for the Commission. It's a difficult one to handle.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, read Krastev on that. It's a good book, the best book I think of last year. It's all about context. And context is the key concept when it comes to history and immediate history. That's what we're talking about here. The context is not the same anymore. When you think about it, at a time, your guider was FPE, wasn't at the government, and it was just one. How many ministers? I don't remember. It was something like one minister, two ministers taking part of the government, and that was a huge crisis. If you compare, and when I say huge crisis, I mean you could read articles on declaration from head of state who were really, no, the Nazis are coming back, and nothing about Article 7 or whatever. Everything stopped because there was a context that gave the possibility for all the countries to do this. Now it's totally different. If you read carefully certain declaration of Orban, I invite you to read the speeches of Orban. Read them. It's fascinating. Speeches of Salvini are not really fascinating. But go on Facebook because it's there. But it's fascinating, really. But if you compare the situation on what these guys are able to say now, and you compare with the situation 50 years ago, it's totally different. And then you count the number of head of states on government that are able to say the same kind of declaration. This is the context we've got to deal with. And that's a very difficult one. For the second question, I'm CIVICO Europa. CIVICO Europa has been founded by Guillaume Clossat and Francesca Ratti. And Guillaume actually is writing a report for ANSIP on intelligence, artificial intelligence. Because, I mean, it covers all what you've been talking about, to my view, because behind you've got artificial intelligence. That's a main issue, really, which is coming up. And you've seen that 2 days ago, it was yesterday maybe, Alexander Stubbs said that there should be a commissioner for artificial intelligence. I think you've got a kind of view on that post, but which is a good idea, actually. Because, I mean, the consequences of artificial intelligence are huge. So obviously the social consequences, I'm not a great fan of what they are doing in China, that's for sure, and the ethics and politics aspect, but the economic aspect as well. There's a global war on that. Do we want to be a part of it? When you see where China is at the moment on these issues, we should begin to think about it, really. That's kind of a really hot topic.
Very briefly on your question on Article 7, you mentioned the case of Austria, and without speculating, we know that at that time this decision of the 14 member states was taken outside the treaty. The Article 7 was not invoked, so it was a question of political will. In the meantime, because the debate at that time was that we don't really have mechanisms, and this was the point put on the table and discussed in 2010 when with the first measures taken by the Fidesz government. And then in the meantime, we see that there are several mechanisms and tools created. And again, the point is that there is no political will. I think that and we all know that the decision at the Council and at the European Council has to be taken by unanimity. And we have also many other options, like, for example, infringement proceedings and other options. So again, my response to your question is, again, political will. We need this. We have mechanisms. There are provisions in the treaty. We have new mechanisms in order to trigger and to prevent this situation. The decision has to be taken at this point by our representatives in the Council and at the level of the European Council. But with this, I would propose to stop here this discussion. Thank you very much to our 3 members of the panel for this very interesting and rich discussion. Thank you also to you, because you are in the audience and you participate to our discussions since the beginning this morning. We will have a last panel in 10 minutes, I think, yes. So see you in 10 minutes for the concluding panel of our day. Thank you.